All right, good morning and thank you once again for joining us, Dr. Lawrence. This is a follow-up recording just to answer the questions that were posed in our webinar, Cannabis Testing in the Workplace, that was held on the 22nd of July 2020. Thank you very much again for an extremely informative presentation, and the comments that we've received have been extremely positive. We did not, unfortunately, get a chance to get the questions answered. So the questions that were posed during that webinar, we are going to respond to today. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So the first question that was posed by Audrey Vermeulen, and it's a double-part question, along with a question that was posed by Crismay Oosthuizen. So the first question was, who is the MRO? Is it only a medical practitioner? And part of the second part of the question from Crismay Oosthuizen was, may a sample be collected under supervision in the workplace? May specimens only be collected by the OH nurse on site?
Okay, that's a three-part question. So the first one is about who's the MRO. The second one is about the collection, supervised collection, and the third one is who may do the collection.
Yes.
Okay, so let's break that question up in the three parts. The first one is the MRO. Who's the MRO? It's a medical review officer. I had a case where actually, you know, what normally happens, or sometimes companies who not really versed in policies and they don't have a proper policy, so the HR people think that they can do the interpretation of these test results. That is very dangerous, because that person who review the test results and actually validate the confirmed test results must have an understanding of the complete policy, and I cannot stress that enough. Policy is the beginning and end of it all. If you don't have a policy that comply with the Constitution, it will definitely not stand up, and we will definitely infringe on human rights. It must be tested and it must be drafted properly. Okay, so the MRO is a medical qualified person, in my opinion, that understands the policy and the whole process of this drug testing setup. He must also have a good understanding of the metabolism of these compounds, and also how drugs and other drugs and medication can interfere. Because people may be very innocent. You know, there's a non-negative screen test, and very innocent, or got some cannabis in passively with passive inhalation. So we really need a person that has a proper understanding of all of this, and also maybe the cross reactions on the screening tests that can interfere, other medication, etc., and appreciate the complications or the complicated matter of this whole issue. Preferably, it should be a person outside the organization. Because if one would use the OC Health doctor or OC Health sister who are involved in the daily care of this person or patient, there would be a doctor-patient relationship of trust. So if that person or that doctor or sister now performs something or report him as being a drug abuser, that relationship of trust is broken. So it should be an independent person to start off with, but definitely not an HR person, and preferably not the sister and the doctor in the clinic, the OC Health doctor, because they have another purpose. So because this drug testing or screening, etc., is not a medical test, it is a test for compliance. But you need medically qualified people, professionally qualified people to do the interpretation, and also are sensitive for ethics. So I would really recommend that we should have someone that understands the ethics of how to speak to a person, how to approach a person, how to obtain voluntary informed consent in a sensitive matter, because we invade someone's privacy here. There's a lot to this. So yes, to start off, what I said initially, definitely not the HR person. They should stick to what they are supposed to do and let the clinicians and the other people and scientists do what they are supposed to do. I have a number of experiences in this regard where a person actually was really suspended or damaged a lot because of an HR person being ignorant regarding the complexity of this. So that brings me to the second part of the question: who may do the collection? There is no act or no specification in the South African legislatory framework as to who may collect the specimen. It must be a person as part of his job description that understands the ethics. So normally I would recommend a sister that at least has to answer, or even a doctor that has to answer in terms of ethics and professionalism to a organization. So that would be my recommendation, independent sister or a doctor. One can also use a security officer, because that is how it works in practice, a security officer. So that is dangerous practice, because these people are not skilled and versed in ethics, and especially in how to go about with collection of. And then they also do the preliminary testing, because the collection officer is normally then responsible for the preliminary testing. And that person must also be skilled and understand the testing procedure, how to get consent, how to trigger a preliminary test, how to go about and answer the patient's questions. So I would really recommend it should be a professional person, not a normal security guard, because we work with an individual here in a sensitive way. Who may collect the collection? What was the other part of it? What did I miss now? I think I missed.
No, I think you have responded. You've spoken about who the MRO is, and the collection of a specimen. The other part was, may it be collected under supervision in the workplace?
Under supervision, yes, that's correct.
Hmm.
That is a real intrusion of privacy. So one must have a very good reason as to why you want to observe, and it's normally more uncomfortable for the observer than for the donor. But there must be a sufficient reason to do that. Normally I recommend that the collection takes place in a cubicle where there is a door, but the cubicle must be open, so that someone can hear. If you would follow a sound protocol in advance by checking that he doesn't wear unnecessary garments, open your pockets, that you cannot tamper with bluing agents in the water of the toilet bowl, and in the water reservoir, no access to water that can be used for dilution. So if your protocol is and your setup is geared as such, no tampering can take place. And then you can also listen out for strange noises. You normally hear that. And if you have doubt, ask the person a second time to donate a second specimen, because they normally prepared for the first tampering but not for a second one. Observation can be motivated with the consent of the patient or of the donor, but that is really invasive. Maybe in a case where the person was known, and this should all be specified in the policy, where the person has in the past been found guilty of tampering. That may be a motivation, but all of these concepts must be specified in the policy. On a negotiated settlement between all parties, and everybody agreed to the policy, because the policy is then actually the contract between the employer and the employee. But yes, I cannot stress the policy enough. Okay.
Thank you. Actually, speaking about the policy, that brings me to the next question that was posted by Audrey Vermeulen. It states that company policies will state zero tolerance for drug use by employees. How will this be changed in policies now?
Let me just get to that question. Company policy, yeah, there it is. I marked it in red actually. So what happens, and you will see that all over popular literature as well, and even sometimes in suggestions of legislation, especially the new bill on zero alcohol. People confuse the concepts of zero alcohol or zero tolerance and zero concentration. Tolerance is an attitude towards, if you transgress, I will not turn a blind eye. Something is going to happen. That's zero tolerance. But zero concentration is a different issue, So people say, well, some of these CEOs say, well, it's my responsibility. There must be no drugs in your system. I understand the approach and the intention is pure, but the execution of that intention is very difficult in terms of science, because especially if you don't standardize on equipment and on test methods, because one test method may have a lower detection limit than another test method. So which one is now zero? What is zero? It depends on the testing technique, and that's why it's so important to standardize on equipment throughout the whole company, throughout the organization, similar to what the government is doing. They standardize on the same equipment. The same breathalyzing equipment is used in Gauteng and in the Western Cape. They standardize. So that zero is the same in all laboratories, in all testing procedures. So zero concentration, I don't know, because one might find that someone inhaled cannabis, for instance, smoked passively. That's not active intake. So how are you going to counter that with a zero concentration approach? And that is why it's so important to set low threshold limits where the person cannot be under the influence or impaired at all. But one need to respect those instances so that you don't construe the test values that you obtain with medical use of substances. And this applies to all medication, even alcohol. If one would take cough syrup, and there will certainly then be alcohol in your body within the therapeutic range, but that's not a transgression. So if you set the level zero, how are you going to come past that? Eventually, what is going to happen if you have a zero concentration? I'm not talking about zero tolerance. That should be the case in any way. There must be no tolerance for people using drugs or alcohol in safety-sensitive positions. I agree, but zero concentration is a very difficult thing to defend, because the first question I would ask is, what do you define as zero? What is the lowest concentration? What's your lowest zero value? So yeah, I talk a lot. I hope I answer your questions. Passive intake for cannabis, passive intake would have a 15 nanograms per mil threshold in urine, because below that it can be regarded as passive intake, not intentional. So one must be very careful with the value zero. There's no such a value actually. I'm sure if you wipe your hand on the table in front of you, you will probably be able, if you have a sensitive enough technique, or the money in your pocket, you will detect cocaine on it. But you did not intend to consume it. So one must be very careful with that approach.
Absolutely, thank you, Doctor. I think what I'm getting out of the most important thing is to identify the difference between tolerance or and
zero concentration.
Zero concentration, but also to acknowledge the fact that impairment is so important. We need to look at, is the person rather impaired at that situation and not necessarily testing positive.
And it's only now, if you think about alcohol, alcohol has been a legal substance of abuse for many years. So therefore, people could get ethical permission to conduct research. And the alcohol levels of impairment are fairly sorted out. But for cannabis, that's very, very gray area. So yes, one must be very not ignorant of all of this. And cannabis research are actually performed only now after it became legal. So one would be able to set low threshold levels, but I have quoted low threshold levels in my previous lecture that one can use. As I said, just caution that zero concentration is not something that is, it sounds very nice. It sounds very strict, noble, but actually it's impossible to defend that concept, because someone else's zero with a more sensitive technique will have a lower zero than mine, for instance. So what is zero now? Are we fair across the board? And eventually what's going to happen, one will only measure noise. I had a company that phoned me and said, yeah, but they have a zero tolerance, and every day the breathalyzer give another value, 0.0001, 0.0005. So which one is now positive and which one is negative? And that illustrates they are actually detecting only noise. And you set a level so that you can actually discriminate between noise and a real case, within the constitutional right of that person to use alcohol or cannabis legally. So the less invasive way would be to allow, to be a little bit err on the side of caution, to be a little bit more lenient, to allow them to use this.
Fantastic, thank you very much. The next question we'll look at is, part of your presentation spoke about a confirmatory test, and the question posed here was from Audrey Vermeulen: how long does it take to receive a confirmatory test, and what are the costs to the company?
Okay, if I can, I think maybe this message did not come clear enough in my lecture or my previous discussion. There's always a screening test, and if you remember my case study with Cabello, screening test, one must be very careful to take any decisive action on a screening test. Firstly, because of the deficient sensitivity and specificity. I gave some figures there. So, and it can also be influenced and cross-reacted. In the case of cannabis, one can expect cross-reaction for ARVs. So one must confirm, analytical confirm, is this the compound in that urine? Does it correspond with the compound on the list? Does it correspond with the definition of the transgression? Yes. Now, the laboratory, we analyze it. Within 24 to 72 hours after receiving the specimen, we deliver the sample or the report to the designated person, which was indicated on the report. And it's not necessarily the company doctor. The patient must give consent. Okay, so within 72 hours, we send the email in a secure fashion, because email transmission, one must be very careful. No telephonic reporting, nothing. All right, so they receive, within 72 hours, they will receive the result. After confirmation, the MRO must now validate. He must have an interview with that patient, or with that, I keep on saying patient, with a worker, with a test subject, to see whether this was used negligently, the cannabis was negligently used. Maybe it was used as under the intention of herbal medication, probably the most abused concept in South Africa at the moment, herbal medication, because it's laced with cannabis sometimes, and the person taking that medication doesn't even know. So the MRO must establish all those facts. And then if that was the case, that it was not intentional, it means this person is not a risk or a drug user, that a risk to the company. So the MRO can then scrap the whole process and say, this is a negative test result. I found no risk in this person. And then he must receive counseling, etc. Don't use that medication again. So there's a whole process. And as I cannot say that enough, we must respect the autonomy and the privacy and the dignity of individuals, like Cabello, because there are many of them that cannot defend themselves. The pricing for cannabis is 1,400, and it goes up to 1,500 per group. If I say per group, it would be amphetamine group or opiate groups, the heroin groups. So 1,500 for those groups. Ecstasy is also in the amphetamine group. And then benzodiazepines, the very oftenly used medication, is 1,700. I hope I answered your question. I say a lot of other things as well, but I need to stress some of these facts again.
Absolutely, thank you. So in response to that question, I mean, as you stated in the webinar, it's so important to do that screening test and use the confirmatory test rather as a means of disciplinary action or anything like that, and not necessarily the screening test.
Absolutely, and not even the confirmation test. That confirmation test result must first pass an MRO's scrutiny. Only then, only after that scrutiny. And that MRO is not a HR person.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you, Doctor. Thank you for that. The next question is, if we look at the part of the presentation, you spoke about CBD oils and how they are rubbed on the skins. So the question posed by Chris Oosthuizen was, if THC is not smoked or digested, will it be detectable in an immunoassay screening?
Yeah, the screening tests that they normally use, yes. The answer is yes. THC, doesn't matter which way it enters the body, it remains THC. So in the process, the body tries to detoxify by changing this THC parent compound. So yes, it is still the same THC. It may enter the body through the skin with a CBD oil that is contaminated with THC, of which there is a lot in our country. As I told you the other day, that business is grabbing this opportunity, and it's actually a fraudulent activity going on at the moment. But you cannot deny people's right to use medication, but we have a responsibility to other people's safety. So yes, CBD oils, even though people claim it has medication properties, etc., medicine properties, one must be careful that it's not contaminated with THC, which will be absorbed through the skin, which will be detected. Obviously, it depends on the amount that you use as well. But it can exceed the threshold value of 10 nanograms per liter, eventually in urine, or even 1 nanograms per mil in serum or in oral fluid.
Great, thank you. That answers that very, very clearly. If we look at detection again, then we'll move down to the next question, which was posed by a ISSUP Nigeria member, Olayamuko Koyego, and he asks, at what level of use is cannabis detected in the hair?
Well, it depends. Look, it takes it like more or less, we need 1 centimeter of hair, and not everybody's metabolism is the same. But we have a detection limit in hair, and that does not necessarily correspond with a dose. It's different for every person because we have different types of metabolism. We are all individuals, biologically speaking, as well. So maybe 10 nanograms per gram of hair, we have a detection limit, but it's impossible to correspond that to the dose that the person was taken. The same in urine. It's impossible to correspond the dose or the concentration in urine with the dose that was consumed. One shouldn't do that. That's why it's so important to have a contract in the form of a policy, a guideline, to say if you exceed this threshold, doesn't matter what the dose was, or doesn't matter how good you metabolize or not good metabolizer, if you exceed this threshold, it's a breach of contract. Don't try to estimate with urine levels or hair levels that the person is an addict or consumed a lot of cannabis, for instance. That is dangerous ground.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. It's what I'm getting from your response is that the policies need to be extremely clear in stating what constitutes what levels, that kind of thing, and what constitutes a breach of contract.
Correct. The threshold levels must be listed. Well, you can have the wording, you should not be intoxicated, but that means very little because what does intoxication mean? Are you still able to perform and there's very little inquiry into the quality of the policies in the labor code, very little inquiry. I think I'm busy writing a few articles to inform them as well. The standard will definitely pick up within the next year. I'm trying my best to do that because the amount of inquiries into the validity of a policy, there's virtually no inquiries. And I think the defense will definitely pick up on this very soon. So if I can give advice, make sure that your policies are written properly.
Fantastic. So that's excellent advice to our members, and it's an important thing for all of us to look at going forward. And how do we assist employers who contact us as substance use professionals? How do we what advice do we give them? And that's fantastic advice. So thank you, Dr. Lawrence. Thank you for that.
You can send them to me because I write these policies in my company as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We will get your company details and post them on our website as well. So thank you very much for that. The next question I'm going to pose was posed by Sibongile Mchachaza. And she asks, in cases where an employee uses cannabis at work but denies such use, but all the signs of use are there, what can one do as a concerned colleague?
This is a more a moral obligation than anything else. If the person clearly looks impaired, for instance, maybe one should then approach him on that basis, because the main thing is one should have a reasonable suspicion. Now, who is the reasonable person? You know, we all think we are reasonable, but some of us are not so reasonable as we think we are. So normally try to get someone that acts as a witness. And this should happen on a need-to-know basis only, with respect for privacy and his dignity. You have a moral obligation if you are aware that someone endangers the lives of others. You have a moral obligation to report that. For instance, what would you do with a tip-off? Someone phones the company and says, my friend or my husband used drugs before I entered your premises. So the company cannot ignore that, because if something now happens, they were warned. So one must have a reasonable suspicion, and that reasonable suspicion can be raised either by a screening test or by observation. If you do observation, have a witness with you, a screening test, and it should be written in the policy that someone can be called at any stage, not only on a random basis, at any stage for a screening test. So then in that way, one can react on a tip-off. So if this lady or this person, I see it's I'm not sure whether it's a male or then or a lady, precious, I don't know, sorry. So if you have a tip-off, then you have actually an obligation to carry on with the process, because other people's lives are endangered here.
And again, this, I mean, it brings in the question of impairment once again in this situation, rather than intoxication. Yeah.
So the policy should also specify, you know, if there's any reasonable suspicion, not only random or after incident or annual medical screening, because the annual medical screening is a different issue. I need to talk on that as well. The annual medical screening is more a medical test to see whether a doctor forms a professional opinion whether this person is a drug user, you know, that can cause damage to his health. But these tests are not medical diagnostic tests. It's compliance tests with a medical angle in terms of ethics and approach. So a compliance test is think about a pre-employment test. That person coming for that pre-employment test is not subjected to the safety environment. Now, if he exceeds the threshold on the screening device for cannabis, how are we going to handle that? Because he was not to apply the safety standards to a person who come for an interview. I think that's the wrong approach. So the doctor must form a professional opinion as to whether this person is a drug abuser and will he pose risk. Do they do that for alcohol as well? So that pre-employment medical examination should be done in the same fashion and same approach as they do for alcohol. So the safety standards is something different from a medical angle. And they mix the two sometimes, you know, the two approaches. And they refuse a person a job, which is like sometimes a death sentence in South Africa, refuse a job because the person took a Sindel containing codeine. Now suddenly he's positive for opiates on a screening test, no, you are a risk for the company because there's opiates in your system, a heroin user. No confirmation because they don't want to confirm pre-employment testing. So you can see the misuse of and the asymmetrical relationship between the sampling and testing officers and the decision makers versus the poor employee. He has no grounds to stand on.
Absolutely, thank you for that. That's it clears up a number of questions I had. So thank you very, very much. The second last question I'm going to ask is from Clara from our Sanka National Office. And that was, she asks, I just need clarity. If ingested cannabis in a form of space cookies or liquid form will give the similar results of individuals who have inhaled or smoked when the urine drug testing is conducted?
Definitely, it will not go up in concentration as quick as smoke because absorption through the lungs is rapid. Like I told you yesterday, within 9 minutes, the effect is there. But if one would take this and it goes through the stomach and through the hepatic portal vein system, it takes time, but definitely it will pick up eventually and it will have the same effect. And the detection of it will be done in the same way. So THC is the same thing, doesn't matter how it enters the body, it's only a matter of how long does it stay in the body and how fast it picks up.
Fantastic.
And if one would eat that in the form of foodstuffs or space cookies, that the delay will be longer, but the effect will be also a slow release type of effect. It will last longer.
Fantastic, thank you. The final question I have here is from Muziwetu Mlondo, and she asks, in a situation where a parent has been referred by a child welfare organization for substance abuse investigation, what would be the most appropriate procedure test for liver damage due to alcohol consumption? What would be a non-invasive way of establishing damage?
We do this at our university, at our laboratory for alcohol testing. We do the best marker would be CDT count, and also mean corpuscular volume. So CDT and MCV, the size of the cells, blood cells. They also use gamma GT sometimes, and but gamma GT is less sensitive. It's not as selective as CDT or MCV tests.
Great. So in a situation like that, the test needs to be done in a laboratory because we're looking at liver damage, that kind of thing. That is
it's a biological marker. Yeah, it's a biological marker. If you look at liver damage for alcohol, CDT is the current standard on how to go about.
Fantastic. Thank you. Dr. Lawrence, thank you very, very much for availing us your time to answer these questions. We really appreciate your expertise and your enormous amount of knowledge that you have shared with us, and we are extremely grateful for you imparting that with us. And we look forward to inviting you back to discuss the alcohol testing in the workplace at some point.
I think that is even a bigger issue in our country at the moment in terms of breath testing for alcohol and the products that are used, the technology that are used for alcohol testing is just scandalous. I have no other word to express this. Yes, I'm looking forward to that as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much once again. To our ISSUP members, we will keep you posted as to when we can schedule our next webinar with Dr. Lawrence to talk about that alcohol testing in the workplace and what we as substance use professionals operating in the field can do to alleviate some of the inconsistencies and inequalities in South Africa when it comes to that kind of testing. Once again, this was a follow-up on the webinar that we held on the 22nd of July 2020, titled Cannabis Testing in the Workplace. We once again thank Dr. Tim Lawrence from the University of Pretoria for doing a presentation and taking the time to answer the questions that were posed by our members. We really do appreciate it, and thank you very, very much. We look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Ciao.